Welcome everyone. Welcome to our third webinar where we have the courage, let's say like that, to proclaim that for us December is the month of solidarity. We were not the first one saying that. We are just following the UN declaration that was in 2005, which declared the 20th of December the International Human Solidarity Day. And for us, as a resource center who supports and tries to bring solidarity in Europe, it's a great opportunity to celebrate that moment and to create the environment and the space where experts, together with practitioners, together with young people, together with policymakers, we debate and we share our opinion and our programs about solidarity. This day is very special for us because we managed to have in the same Zoom room, let's say like that, experts from two main, let's say, institutions that are supporting volunteering and solidarity in the world. I'm very grateful that we have with us representatives of the United Nations Volunteer Program and also the European Commission. And of course, I'm very grateful that all of you dedicated your time, 90 minutes, to learn more about solidarity. Nevertheless, very grateful that Elizabeth and Maria, our two facilitators, also decided to join this journey. December is the month where we are closing a year, but it's also the month where we are trying to push for values that are very important to be continued and promoted in the world. So I hope we will have fruitful, inspiring discussions in the next 90 minutes and that we will continue, of course, also next year. But more will come also at the end. So thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Amina, for this start. Maybe to start, to give an overview, I'm very glad that we have so many people, actually from all around the world, mainly from Europe and Africa, but also from Asia. So it's a great opportunity to join and to work together and to learn together about solidarity. It's very interesting. We realized that we have a big range of expertise and of experience connected to development learning and to solidarity. So there's some people with us who work as volunteers in different organizations, or some in the context of university, some as staff in various NGOs. So it's great to have so many different people and different knowledge with us. And maybe that's also a good point. Knowledge on solidarity seems to be a big unifying wish or expectation for this webinar for today, worldwide, but also on a European level, on the level of programs and possibilities. So I really hope that we will meet these expectations today. Connected to that, there was also a big wish to get inspired for new projects, for new researches, and to learn more about the Day of Solidarity. So there were various wishes mentioned for today. So we are very happy to have two, and Amina already introduced that, two fantastic and very experienced, very competent people with us for today who will share their knowledge and their experience with us. So I'm very happy to have Amina, Abdel, Rahman, Mohamed, Seailles with us. She is UNDP, UNV Communications and Partnerships expert. She will start with an input. We will have a very short reflection moment afterwards to digest a bit what we've heard. And then I'm happy to introduce Pierre Seailles from the European Commission, Program Manager of Youth Policy and Programs in the European Commission. We hopefully will have time at the end for questions, so you're warmly invited to share your questions in the chat, to discuss, and to really use this opportunity to meet these two speakers and to learn and to exchange on solidarity. So that's the program for today. I will not talk anymore, and I will pass over to Amina. Thanks, Amina, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for the kind introduction. I hope you can all hear me well. It's a pleasure for me to be with you here today, representing the United Nations Volunteers Program based in Bonn, Germany. And I've been invited to share some reflections on Human Solidarity Day, International Human Solidarity Day, and the role of UNV as an organization and our UN volunteers on the ground. So allow me to share my screen, and then we'll get started with a short presentation. I promise it won't be boring. So I wanted to start my presentation, which I've called Volunteers for Solidarity, by giving you a bit of an introduction on what it is that solidarity in the United Nations signifies. To start off with, the concept of solidarity has defined the work of the United Nations for since the beginning of its foundation. It was founded on the basic premise that its partners needed to work in unity and harmony. The whole of the United Nations system relies on the solidarity and unity of its members to be able to maintain international peace and security and to work jointly to solve global problems that can have an economic, social, or humanitarian nature or character. In 2002, the United Nations established the World Solidarity Fund under the United Nations Development Programme, and the aim was to eradicate poverty and promote human and social development. In 2005, then, the United Nations proclaimed today, the 20th of December, as International Human Solidarity Day. But why do we need an International Day for Solidarity? Today, the International Human Solidarity Day is a day where we can celebrate our unity in diversity. It's a day where we remind governments to respect their commitments to international agreements, a day to raise public awareness on the importance of solidarities, and a day to encourage debate on the ways we can achieve and promote solidarity for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and for advancing human development, peace and development across the world. And it's also, of course, a day where we can encourage new initiatives for poverty eradication and addressing the challenges of our current day. So the whole of the United Nations system is geared to work towards peace and development through solidarity. So what's special about our organization? The United Nations Volunteers Program is based in Bonn, Germany, and it contributes to peace and development through volunteerism worldwide. How do we do that? We work with partners to integrate qualified, highly motivated, and well-supported UN volunteers into their development programming to work on their programs and to support them in achieving their mandates. What UNV also does is promote the value and global recognition of volunteerism worldwide, and we are administered by the United Nations Development Programme. So a couple of facts and figures about UNV. We have about 150 staff members at our headquarters in Bonn, Germany, and in our regional offices in the 6 regions of the world. We have volunteers around the world addressing development challenges. In 2021, we deployed around 11,000 UN volunteers in the field, and 53% of these were women. We also facilitated 2,500 online volunteer assignments. So people who, from the comfort of their home, via the internet, support other organizations and governments, etc., in achieving their development goals. And an important and quirky fact to note is that in the 4 years between 2018 to 2021, 1 million 663,729 local volunteers, at least, were mobilized in partnership with UNV. This falls under our wider mandate of promoting volunteerism for development and is quite an impressive figure. In the graphic, you can see that last year, in 2021, these 11,000 UN volunteers I spoke of were hosted by 56 United Nations partners. 60% of them were national UN volunteers, so volunteers who were serving in their own countries, compared to 41 who were international volunteers. 66% of our international volunteers came from the Global South, so we have volunteers from the Global South taking their knowledge and sharing it in countries of the Global South themselves. These volunteers were deployed in 160 countries, and their average age was 34 years. Now, let me tell you a bit more about what it is we do. So in this graphic, you see that UNV is a common service that deploys on-site and online volunteers, and we provide the whole enabling environment for these UN volunteers to serve with United Nations partners worldwide. So we support the recruitment, deployment, and contract management of these UN volunteers. We have an extensive global talent pool with a large range of potential volunteers in all kinds of different specializations who are just yearning to get out into the field and help build capacity and tackle problems. I've listed here a couple of examples for areas in which UN volunteers serve, but the list is very long. So just as a taster, UN volunteers serve in everything from emergency response to humanitarian relief, support and protection of volunteers, internally displaced people, children, and otherwise vulnerable people. They serve in food safety, in nutrition, in water sanitation and hygiene. We have volunteers who are doctors and nurses and midwives and trainers. We have volunteers who are engineers, who work in construction, who work in partnerships and resource mobilization, who support logistics and supply management. As you can see, there is a very broad range of specializations in which UN volunteers can serve. The average age, as I said, is 34, and your typical UN volunteer has 5 to 10 years of experience in their professional area. Now, just to introduce you to a couple of volunteers on the ground, if you visit our website or follow our social media, you will see a lot of contributions from our volunteers about what they're doing. So you can see here, for example, on the far left of my screen, this is Anita Shabani, who is a UN volunteer in Kosovo as per UN Security Council Resolution 1244. She serves with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. She's a volunteer with a disability, and she speaks about how, despite everything, her disability, her gender, her background, she knows that she's a strong addition to the United Nations. In the center of my screen, you see Stephen Morris. He's a national United Nations volunteer, so a volunteer serving in his home country of Jamaica, and he works in communications, but his focus is on areas of gender-based violence. And if you read his story, you'll see how he expresses his views on the toxic masculinity he feels is prevalent in his culture and how more needs to be done to address that. On the right of my screen, you see that we have a story about Afro-descendant UN volunteers in Latin America. And this article features 2 volunteers, Glenda Joanna and Maribeth, and they're from Guatemala and Colombia, and they share their views on how participation and inclusion is essential to advance inclusion and to reduce inequalities so that everyone has a voice at the table when issues of concern are being addressed. But UN volunteers don't just serve in countries like these. We also have volunteers who serve in difficult duty stations in times of crisis. So very recently, we had the floods in Pakistan, which created a lot of devastation. And one of our former volunteers, a volunteer who served with UNV many years ago, was among the first to volunteer on the ground. Danish Murad is seen here in the picture, talking with people who were displaced by the floods, and he was among the first on the ground distributing food supplies and medication and helping people find places of safety for refuge. In the middle of my screen, again, you see that we have volunteers serving in South Sudan, the youngest nation of the world. Again, a very difficult duty station where the country is trying to establish, with the help of the United Nations mission, a safe situation where civilians are protected and where they can return and settle in their places of origin. And we have UN volunteers there who are working with the mission on every one of the areas which I listed just a while ago: protection, returnees, and providing services in every shape and form. Also in the war in Ukraine, we have UN volunteers who are delivering around the clock. We have online volunteers who are serving from the comforts of their homes and supporting the situation, and we have on-site volunteers. This year so far, we've had 160 UN volunteers, 146 of those national, who are part of the response to the crisis there. So volunteers really have a diversity of profiles and a lot of value to add. They work embedded in the teams of our United Nations partners, and they have a lot that they can share, and they do so with a high level of enthusiasm and motivation because they are there with the spirit of volunteerism to give all that they can. Now, just this month, we celebrated International Volunteer Day, and our theme for this year was solidarity. So it's really fits with the celebration that we're having around solidarity together with our colleagues in the European Solidarity Corps. So International Volunteer Day is marked every year on 5 December. And our campaign this year was celebrating the power of collective action to drive positive change. So we were using the hashtag #TogetherActNow, and our campaign was aimed to demonstrate how volunteers, glue together, work together, and are an unbreakable chain of goodwill. It was a chance for us to say thank you, not just to UN volunteers, but to volunteers around the world, because we believe that volunteers are the everyday champions of local action and global solidarity. Just to share a couple of highlights from our campaign, you see a quote from the executive coordinator of United Nations Volunteers, Toili Kurbanov, who said, "Volunteerism is where compassion meets solidarity." And there is a wealth of materials that have been, circulating on our social media and are also on our website that you can refer to see how we celebrated this day. And I'd like to end my presentation by asking my colleagues to please share a video with some messages that we had on volunteerism. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Every day, millions of people dedicate their time, efforts, and hearts to helping others and making the world a better place. Drawn together by solidarity, they bring concrete solutions to development challenges and for the common good.
They come from all corners of the world, represent all age groups and cultural backgrounds, bring diverse skills and unique experiences. Yet they all have one thing in common: a desire to give back. They are volunteers.
On this International Volunteer Day, UNICEF joins in celebrating volunteers across the globe, the people who dedicate their time and energy to helping others and to making the world a better place.
They're not only building a better world for tomorrow, working in solidarity with communities, they are building a better world today.
Your contribution to enriching local communities is getting us one step closer to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals.
Join today, because every action counts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Thanks for this information and for knowing more about UNV and the big amount of activities worldwide you do. So thanks for that. I would invite you all for a short reflection moment before we move on to and connect it to European perspective and program. And I would invite you to use the chat for a short sharing on what did you take with you? What did you hear? What is still in your mind from what Amina was sharing with us? Any feedback, any word, sentence, thought that you take with you from these last 15 minutes of information? And I would invite you to use the chat and share with us thoughts, ideas, remarks, comments.
I would have a question, if it's possible, until the group starts. And my question to Amina, thanks a lot for giving us an overview. My question would be, do you know if from the beginning UNV was connected strongly with solidarity as a value? Because indeed we have the International Human Solidarity Day since 2005, but UNV is much longer than that. So my question is, what were the values from which UNV was created at the beginning, if you know?
Thank you. So as I said, the whole of the United Nations system is, the whole concept of solidarity defines the work of the United Nations system and our collaboration in our aspirations to address the crises of our day, whether they're peace, development, humanitarian, and you name it. The United Nations Volunteers Program, when it was established in 1971, was established to harness the power of volunteerism in the United Nations system in support of the work of the United Nations system and the mandate. So I would claim that solidarity has been an essential part, an essential driving force of what we do as the United Nations and as United Nations volunteers. An important thing to note is that our UN volunteers serve embedded within our United Nations partners teams. So we don't send United Nations volunteers out into the blue, if you wish. They're serving with UNICEF, they're serving with peacekeeping missions, they're serving with UNDP, they're serving with the Human Rights Organization, with the Refugee Organization, with the Population Fund, and so on. So everywhere you find UN volunteers, we are supporting our partners in achieving their mandates. And another very important thing to remember is that very, very often these volunteers are the face of the United Nations in the field. Because most of our volunteers are from the Global South, serving in the Global South, or from a country serving in their home country, they are very often the ones engaging with communities. So they're on the front lines, they're the ones carrying the United Nations messages and objectives to the people, to engage them in the whole peace and development process.
Thank you. I'm observing the chat a bit, and there's quite a lot of thanks for the information and for the importance of volunteering and the necessity of inclusiveness too. So that what you were mentioning too, and there's 2 or 3 remarks connected to how can we be part of it or how can we promote it. And I would maybe ask you these questions right away. Because this is very much connected to what you were saying, and then we might move on. So maybe you could answer this question now.
Absolutely, Elizabeth, not a problem. As I mentioned in my presentation, if you visit the UNV website, unv.org, you will find information about what it means to volunteer in your country or abroad. You'll also find the links to our unified volunteering platform, which is where we place the announcements for all volunteer assignments that become available. And people can go to our website and register, fill out their profiles, and apply for assignments that interest them. Now, these assignments can be a national assignment where you're serving in your home country. It can be a youth assignment where you are a younger person with less professional experience who wants to contribute to the work of the United Nations. It can be an assignment as an expert, someone who has years of experience and would like to give back to community through the United Nations. It can also be an online volunteering volunteering assignment. So if you're in sort of the throes of your career and you don't want to break off, but you do want to contribute to peace and development through the United Nations, you can become an online volunteer. And in the time that you dedicate, you can support organizations across the world in doing their work towards peace and development. So a lot of information is on our website. Please visit it and find out more. And if you follow us on social media, you'll find us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. You will see the stories and the inspiration, but you'll also find the links to where do I go to find the conditions of service, for example, for UN volunteers, or the latest assignments for Ukraine or for Pakistan and other areas where people are needed urgently to support in addressing the crisis there.
And so there's a question connected to that on the global talent pool.
Yes, the Global Talent Pool is our pool of registered candidates who are willing and keen and enthusiastic to serve in the United Nations. So basically, as I said, you go to the United Nations volunteering platform, and it's app.unv.org, and you will find there the instructions and the guidance for you to register as a potential volunteer, and then you can apply for assignments as they become available that are of interest to you and for which you fulfill the requirements of the opportunity.
Thanks a lot for answering these very specific questions. The link of the website is in the chat, so you can start right after this webinar in finding more information and connecting to UNV. I would use this opportunity. Thanks, Amina, for now. We'll have time for more questions afterwards. And I would use this opportunity now to introduce Pierre Seailles from the European Commission to tell us more about the new strand of the Humanitarian Aid program. You will tell us more about that. And the link to solidarity and why is it needed for solidarity. So I think it's very much connected on the European level to what Amina was starting with. We're talking about volunteerism and the importance here of volunteers worldwide. Pierre, thanks for joining us.
Many thanks, Elizabeth. And actually, I'm quite struck by the similarities of what we want to do with what the UN volunteers have been doing for many, many years. The objectives are very similar. The areas where we plan to have projects are also very similar, spanning from humanitarian aid to longer term development. There are, however, a few big differences, and so I think the first thing I would do, even before starting the presentation, would be to highlight these differences. The first one, obviously, is that we have a focus on youth exclusively, because the Solidarity Corps, which is part of which the Humanitarian Aid Volunteers Corps is part of our youth programs. So this means that the volunteering that we promote is focused on young people up to 35 years old for volunteering in humanitarian aid. And this is the first and main difference. Another difference, I hope that's it. Another difference, apologies, is that we support projects that are presented by NGOs. So the aim is not to send volunteers to EU projects only, is to receive proposals from NGOs of all sizes. Some are tiny with just a few people, some are big with international networks. And based on their proposals, to select the ones that we believe are the most useful, both I hope this will be over. There's no way I can stop it. I apologize. If it continues, maybe I will ask you to have an interruption. I'm sorry, but I hope it should be over for now. So I'm sorry, I have lost a bit my track. Yes, so we support projects that are presented to us. We don't create projects and say, how could we fit volunteers? So that is also probably a big difference. Maybe now the best is to start the presentation, and I would focus already that we have several targets. Actually, we have the effect on the ground. So we want our volunteers to contribute to positive effects on the ground. But we also focus our attention on the volunteers themselves. So it's a double target. We target at the same time an improvement of the living conditions of the local populations and of the local communities. And at the same time, we have in mind that the volunteer must improve his or her own professional and personal development. It's not only a professional experience. Volunteering in a faraway country is a personal experience too. And many volunteers who have had such an experience several years ago still remember the impact it had on their personal life. And inside this focus on the volunteers, there is an additional layer, because as one of the examples shown by Amina, we also want to involve volunteers with fewer opportunities. Fewer opportunities meaning difficult background, difficult social background, living with disabilities, having had very difficult experiences in life at a young age. And we try to incorporate and involve young volunteers with difficult backgrounds also in the volunteering teams that are sent abroad, so that they can bring also their experience, the suffering they might have endured, can help them to understand better in some situations the living conditions of the people they are there to help. Just to give you a very simple example, someone who has been living all his life or her life in a big city and has got a university education and has had enjoyed a lot of privileges, might not be the best suited person to help a rural community in a very poor country. Whereas someone coming from a rural background in a country in Europe might have a more immediate understanding of the issues that he or she will be contributing to help. So we have, as you understand, we have several different target groups. We have, again, just to summarize, we have the beneficiaries on the ground, but we have also different types of volunteers. And all these targets are in our mind when we agree to send volunteers in a given place, in a given project. So maybe now we can start with the actual presentation. So what is the objectives? Well, to facilitate the transition, maybe we can go, facilitate, thank you, the transition from the humanitarian response to long-term sustainable and inclusive development. That's what we call linking relief, rehabilitation, and development in our jargon in the EU. It means in practice that we don't send young people in the middle of disasters. That we don't do, because they don't have the experience, and in these situations you need real professionals. So it would be no use. They would the young people in these situations would be more a weight than an asset, and so we don't send them in the middle of the disaster. However, once the cameras are gone, and once the immediate impact has been unfortunately affected, then there is a longer period where reconstruction is needed. And reconstruction doesn't mean only reconstructing buildings, it also means reconstructing people. And that takes time. And so the projects where our volunteers will be sent are projects where in the time span after the disaster, I would say it would be at least 6 months after the disaster, and probably a bit more, and trying to achieve a long-term effect, not just saving lives immediately, which is of course very important, but also helping communities which have been made vulnerable by the disaster to overcome the trauma and to get back into a more normal life when possible. And that sometimes takes not months, but years. And so that means that we try to have a durable effect, not only sending volunteers for 6 months, having the volunteers come back, and then things staying as they were before with just a little improvement. No, projects for which we send volunteers tend to last several years. And so it's not just one volunteer going, it's one after the other. And hopefully with a longer duration, they can have a bigger impact. But in the end, the best impact is then they are able to build capacity locally so that the local communities can take over once the last volunteer has gone. So the aim is not for us to send volunteers forever in the same places. On the contrary, the aim is that the volunteers with the projects they will be embedded in will contribute to build the capacities of the local communities so that they're able, after that, to take better care of themselves. Next slide, please. So it's also to reinforce disaster preparedness. We talk a lot about disasters, but if we can avoid the bigger impacts of disasters, it's all the better. It's like in health, prevention is always much less costly and much less traumatic than curing the effects after the health situation has deteriorated. Sorry. So this means it's important to be in the prevention phase too. And last point, I saw the UN volunteers were operating in Ukraine. Unfortunately, our rules don't allow us to do that because we are forbidden to send volunteers in places where there are armed conflicts. And obviously Ukraine now, there is an armed conflict ongoing there. And so in order to ensure full security and safety of our volunteers, we always ensure that they are first well prepared. Second, that the organization that hosts them has security procedures and security plans in case of any security incident. And of course, we avoid areas where there are already ongoing conflicts. So, of course, everything is possible everywhere, and the risk is never zero. But we do our utmost to avoid situations where volunteers would be at big risk, let's put it that way. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have these two objectives of developing the skills and the personal development of the young people, and at the same time to make a meaningful contribution to the society and to the local communities. Across Europe and beyond, here is written, because the Solidarity Corps also operates within Europe. I'm talking today about the new humanitarian strand, which will be starting in a couple months. and which is for us completely new. So we don't have, like Amina, a long experience of decades of operation. We have had a volunteers program in the EU before, but they were different, a different format and a different perspective. So this is all new for us, and we hope we will be able to deliver something that is useful. But we are very humble. It's a tiny program, a tiny action, sorry, and we're just starting. So we don't know how it will go, how it will develop, and how it will work. Next slide, please. This I think I've already talked about, so we can move to the next one. The activities is either individual volunteering from 2 to 12 months, or volunteering teams from 2 weeks to 2 months, where a big group can have an impact in a short period of time. Otherwise, individuals would go up to 6 months, 9 months, or 1 year. And what is very important is that all the NGOs that host volunteers must have a valid quality label. And the quality label is a kind of our insurance policy to make sure that the volunteers will be in safe hands, and also that the security conditions will be appropriate. So we have this vetting system, which is very important to ensure that we know where our volunteers are going. Next slide, please. So the age limits I've already talked about. It's mentioned here that it's 30 years for the other activities of the Solidarity Corps that take place within Europe. The training is very important. We have an online training of 25 hours and then a face-to-face training of 5 days on site with an exam, in order to also to make sure that the volunteers are prepared. So we make sure that the organizations are suitable to host volunteers, and we try to make sure that the volunteers are ready to go. So nobody's ever ready to go to the other side of the world, but we try to give them as much preparation as we can. And also to avoid that when they arrive, they are lost in cultural conflicts. It's very important that their behavior, Amina mentioned volunteers as being also UN ambassadors. We want our young people to be EU ambassadors and to behave appropriately in all kinds of contexts, even when they are culturally very different from what they are used to. Social inclusion, I've mentioned this. And of course, focus on education, competence development, and recognition, because we are a youth program. So it's the same program that also manages Erasmus+. You probably have heard about that other program of university exchanges. So it is another program here we're talking about, which is about non-formal education, but it is still about education. Next slide, please. So the training, I mentioned this. I think I've said it all. In addition to the training I mentioned before leaving, there is a pre-departure training organized by the sending organization, an on-arrival training organized by the host organization, and then a constant mentoring of the volunteers throughout their deployment, so as to ensure that they learn something, that they have a clear they have clear learning objectives, and that by the end of their volunteering experience, they will have made a progress on their learning objectives. And I think we're at the end. Oh, just one more. Next deadline for project proposals, May 23, for the organizations that would be interested, but that they need to have already the quality label. If they don't have the quality label yet, they need to get that first. And all this is explained in the program guide, and all the links are on the last slide. And I think with that, I can give you back the floor. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Pierre. I didn't cut your presentation now, did I? Already. Thanks for that. Thanks for the insight in the new strands of the humanitarian aid program or the addition to the European Solidarity Corps. Again, I would invite everybody to share thoughts on these informations, the information Pierre provided, thoughts, comments. So the invitation again is to use the chat for thoughts, comments. And I see that there is quite some comments in the chat. Pierre, you're...
Yes, I see some questions I could already answer quickly, maybe, if that's all right. Or we can wait for a couple of minutes.
I think if it is a connection, is a question directly connected to what you have been saying before, please answer. So you're very welcome to do so.
So there's a question about the possibility for non-EU based organizations to apply. Yes, it is not only a possibility, it is an obligation. Our projects do not work unless there is a non-EU based organization to host the volunteers. So we need non-EU based organizations, definitely. So please, whatever the country outside the EU, you can apply to get the quality label, and then you will partner with an organizations from within the EU.
Okay, I think that's also the last comment in the chat is connected to what you've been just saying.
If I could just jump in, Elizabeth, one of the points that was made in the chat, one of the questions raised is whether UNV or volunteering is child friendly. And I just wanted to clarify that we have volunteers serving all across the world in very different situations. So there are family and non-family duty stations. This is the same for UN staff as well. And volunteers have the option, or potential candidates have the option, to apply for assignments, whether in their home country or in any other country they wish to serve in. So if someone wishes to serve in Afghanistan or wishes to serve in Sudan or in Burkina Faso, it is their choice to apply for that assignment. We make clear what the conditions are in each of these duty stations, or in any duty stations one applies for. So if it is a regular family duty station, you can take your family along, you can take a spouse or children, etc., and you would have our conditions of service elaborate what kind of support you get for your family, etc. So again, a suggestion to visit the unv.org website, and if you look under Become a Volunteer Conditions of Service, you will see the different guidelines that are available and what kind of entitlements volunteers become. So everything from the volunteer allowance to the health insurance to the travel arrangements and so on is all listed there in detail, and a good reference for all who are interested in these opportunities.
Thanks, Amina, for the clarification on that. I see there's quite some questions already popping up in the chat, so I think question round is open. Maybe to go from the last one, there was the connection to Ukraine again.
I saw the question.
Then Pierre, can I ask you to answer on that?
Yes, I saw the question. Unfortunately, the answer is crystal clear. It is just not allowed. We are not allowed to operate in Ukraine or in any other country where there is an armed conflict ongoing. So another possibility would be to operate in neighboring countries and to help refugees. That we can do, but not in Ukraine itself. So a country like Moldova, for instance, would be eligible, but not Ukraine itself until the armed conflict is over. And there's
maybe
nothing
another
we can
connection
change
on
to
eligibility. Sorry, Pierre. Supporting and sending organization from European Solidarity Corps in Morocco, are they eligible to apply for this project?
Of course, and they're welcome to do so as a host organization. All the countries in the world basically are eligible. Let's not go in details, but in principle, any organization can offer to host volunteers, and for that needs to get the quality label I mentioned before. And we need host organizations.
Very good to hear. So maybe At this point, once again, there is the program guide. There is a lot of information on it. So in case one of your organizations is interested in participating or applying, then it would be a good first step to read this guide. Gabriela, you wrote in the chat that you have a couple of questions. So may I invite you to share one or two of your questions with us?
Thank you. Yes, about the Humanitarian Aid program. I'm Gabriela Civica from the Center for European Volunteering. Maybe just, Pierre, just to clarify, I think it's correct, but just for absolute clarity with people, it's only organizations based in the EU that can be applicants for the funding, correct? This is something I think people were asking about, and something that's still not perhaps clear. The applicant has to come from the EU. I don't know if you can just confirm that's correct. And also maybe you could go into a bit more deal about the logic and the reasoning why in the EU Aid volunteer strand of the Solidarity Corps, the volunteer mobility is only one way. So I think we heard from the UNV program where the volunteers can move, all around the globe in all directions. But the European Solidarity Corps Humanitarian Aid strand is only about European volunteers going out. So I would be interested to hear what's really the logic behind that, and where and how we lost the sense of reciprocity in these kind of programs.
Thanks a lot, Gabriela. I heard the first webinar, and I remember you made the same comment, so I expected that might come back. So on your first point, no, it's not exactly how you described it. In order to get funding, organizations that are not from Europe need to partner with an organization from Europe and together apply for funding. So first, they both need to get the quality label, and among organizations that have the quality label, they need to get together and partner and present a project together. But it's not it's not the EU organization that will necessarily have the lead. Every organization, it's a multi-beneficiary system. So every organization will get their share of the budget. So it's not going to go all to the organization based in the EU, who will then decide how to redistribute it. No, from the start, the share of each partner in the consortium will be clearly set out, and then each partner will receive the share according to the proposal. But in that sense, it's not projects will not be led by EU organizations with non-EU organizations just following and just being kind of subordinate. Well, we hope it's not the case. Again, we're just starting. So we have our first projects are being signed now, and we will see how it works. But the intention is clearly not that one. As regard your second point about the the double way, the reciprocity. This is a first attempt. We are starting. It's a tiny program. We have a budget of around 7 million a year, which is not huge. I mean, it may sound a lot, but it's not huge. And for the time being, the EU legislators, the Parliament and the Council, have decided that the volunteers should come from EU countries plus 4 other European countries that are not part of the EU. We will see. There will be an evaluation in 24. And if the evaluation concludes that the system should be improved by allowing two-way streets, by allowing volunteers from faraway countries to participate in the program as volunteers, then it will be for the legislators to amend the current regulation. But it will be in their hands. We're just starting, so we don't know exactly how it will work. We hope it will work well, but if it's a huge success, let's imagine it will be a huge success, then we will have arguments to plead in favor of the reciprocity that you're advocating for. But this is premature. We need to start. Our first concern is to have projects and to have volunteers. Voilà. But for your request, we will need to see how the program evolves and what are the results of the evaluation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. We will keep watching. Thank you.
Thanks. So that was, as you said, the connection to the last webinar too, the topic on reciprocity. Maybe I saw Manuel has a question, maybe just quickly before, because there was one other question in the chat. Amina, very directly connected to an experience, a UN volunteering experience and the problems of changing website. Is there a possible quick answer connected to that?
Yes, it does. Yes, yes. I would like to answer if...
Okay, Manuel, you go first.
I would like to make a question about if SALTO could give me the opportunity of a volunteer or trainee. Thank you.
I'm not sure if we understood the question.
Elizabeth,
right.
it's just about the different opportunities that are available. I think particularly in Manuel's case for people who are over 30 and also with specific needs. But I think you're on the right track, Manuel. I think the SALTO trainings and the online trainings with SALTO, I think are quite suitable for you especially. But you know that we are supporting you to find the things. But it is a challenge when people reach the age of 30. There's not so many opportunities for volunteering in the European programs.
Okay, very good, very nice. Thanks, thanks, Manuel. Thanks, Gabriela. And maybe there is, as Amina was presenting before, an opportunity to see also for the UNV website, because the age group is a bit higher. So sorry, Amina, and
not a problem. Just a quick response that I've already written to Alia to please drop me a line and I'll connect her with the relevant colleague who'll see if they can issue a certificate for her online volunteering service, which we appreciate very much. And maybe just to elaborate on the last point that you made, UNV offers a lot of assignments and in very many different areas of profession, but also for all different nationalities and capacities. So there are assignments that are, you're welcome to apply to any assignment, but there are also assignments where we specifically indicate that we are encouraging persons with disabilities to apply, or we're looking for Indigenous volunteers, etc. So please have a look at the opportunities and see if there's something that speaks to you.
thanks. There was a question on Youth Pass, Pierre. I think that's connected to you.
Yes, it is. Youth Pass is kind of certificate. It's a recognition of an experience in education, and not necessarily formal education. In our case, it's informal education. And so when the volunteers will have finished their deployment, they will receive a Youth Pass, which will recognize their experience, and that they can then mention in their CVs and for their future experiences. So voila, it's just it's not a diploma. It's a kind of recognition of the experience that they will have had.
Thanks for that. Thanks also, Barbara, for adding some comments and explanations in the chat on the different topics we were talking about. Is there any more questions connected to the programs, connected to UNV, connected to the Humanitarian Aid strand, to the link to solidarity? So you're warmly invited to share in the chat or to raise your hand and to ask your question or your comment. I see in the chat that Sarah, you added quite some comments also on the importance of a clear focus and the vulnerability of women and children. I'm not sure if there is a question connected to that, or if you wanted to ask a question, or if you wanted to give a comment on that. But thanks for the contributions anyhow. So I can see Miguel raising his hand, and hi Miguel. I think you're on the podium.
Hi Lizzie, nice to see you. Thank you for both presentations. The question is for Pierre regarding the humanitarian aid. We are an organization in Vienna also that applied already for the quality label and we got approved. Yay. And we are now in the second phase going to asking for a budget and starting a project. And it was quite interesting for me to listen to you, and it makes a little bit clearly for me about the background of the participants as such. And I was expecting a more or less like, okay, they have to be more kind of experts, but as I can see, are pretty much the same as a regular ESC volunteer that we are sending abroad. And that gives me, of course, a question or a question raised to my head regarding the capacity building that you were talking about. How is it going to work for young people until 35 going abroad to a place where a catastrophe or a crisis just occurred, and they will work in the aftermath, if I understood right? How are going to be protected psychologically speaking, and which kind of capacity are they going to be able to get, and in the other hand, to receive? I don't know if it's quite clear my question or it's too broadly. I'm sorry, it just popped my mind.
That's all right. I'll try to answer, Miguel. The first thing is that they will learn first, and then they will be able to hand over their knowledge to the local communities. So it is also a learning experience for them. They will not be able to do capacity building from the first day, except if they are already in their 30s. They have already had many experiences across the world. And so it is possible that a few volunteers will have some expertise that they will be able to share from the start. But that's frankly not what we expect to be the majority. As I said, the program is open to young people from 18 years old. They don't need to have a diploma. They don't need to have finished high school. So some of them will probably not have a lot of formal knowledge when they start. But they will learn with the local communities, and they will have a very wide support and mentoring from the organization they will be serving in. And so if the young people don't have the full experience themselves, they will be, how would I say, they will be supported from behind by the organization which hosts them and by the support organization that contributed to sending them. So they will not be on their own. They will not be sent on their own across in another faraway country, hoping that they will be able on their own to find solutions to heavy and difficult problems. No, they will learn to see where the problems come from first, to understand. And if they understand, and probably not all will, but if and when they do understand, then they will be able to contribute something. It might not be a very sophisticated knowledge that they will be able to transfer, but if they are able to kind of animate and motivate local populations to try to get inside a change process, that will already be a huge progress. So we are humble. We don't expect that our volunteers will change the world or even the local communities where they are. We hope that they will just contribute to some improvements. And improvements can also be of a human nature. Just bringing warmth and kindness, that is already something that anybody can bring, and you don't need to have gone to Cambridge to do that. Anybody can help, can sympathize, can have compassion. That is what is most important. So they will learn while they do it, and hopefully they will be able to transfer some of what they've learned to the local communities. Now, as for your first question about how they will be supported by their organization and what safety will they have mentally, notably, well, it is part of the quality labor precisely to ensure that the organizations that will host them are fully equipped to support them also psychologically if they have that kind of problem. So this is a very important aspect of the program. We know that it is young people we're talking about, and they can be very destabilized if they find themselves in the middle of Nepal. We have a project in Nepal, I'm just an example, or in South America or in Africa. And if they are not properly supported by their organization, then they will be lost. So this is a key aspect. We must have mentoring that is very close to them. And mentoring, again, is not only on professional aspects, it's also on personal aspects. So we hope, and we will do all we can to ensure that they are kept safe in all aspects, and not just from war, also from the daily incidents they will be faced with. Voila, but we're starting, so we hope it will work.
Thank you for that.
There was a question connected in the chat to the profile, but for UNV volunteers. So maybe Amina, you can link this topic to UNV and maybe connect it to a second question that was written in the chat. If the volunteers and how and if the volunteers are aware if they are contributing to the SDG goals. This is the question for both programs. But maybe, Amina, may I invite you to start and to link it to the profile of volunteers?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's a very interesting discussion here, and I really welcome the questions. To start first with the profiles and selection of volunteers, every volunteer assignment has a description that is advertised on our unified volunteering platform. And I put the link in the chat. It's app.unv.org. So when you go onto that description of assignment for a volunteer opportunity, you will find a very clear indication of which is the host entity, what is the nature of the position, what requirements are there, and how will you be contributing to the work of the UN entity and to sustainable development or peace or humanitarian relief, depending on what the assignment is about. The services that UNV provides to our partners in the United Nations family is that we manage the selection process. So people apply via our register via our platform and apply for volunteer assignments, and we do the initial vetting and selection, and we offer the United Nations partners a number of volunteer profiles where we say these five volunteers are the best suited for this assignment. And we have a very strong focus on ensuring that there's gender balance in the offering that we are making to the partners. The final choice remains with the partner. So whether the partner chooses a woman from Sierra Leone or a woman from Colombia or a man from somewhere else is really in their hands. But we make sure to provide as balanced as possible an offering of highly qualified volunteers that they can choose from. So I hope that responds to the questions in this regard. I've seen a couple of comments about the Sahel region or about the state of Palestine. We have volunteers serving everywhere in the world, and we all have countries and locations that we either call home or that are dear to our hearts. If you go onto our website and search by country, you will find information about the volunteers serving in a given country. So for example, if we talk about the Sahel region, which is more than just a country, we have our regional office for West and Central Africa has a strong partnership there with different United Nations organizations. And for example, together with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, we're working on the Great Green Wall initiative of the Sahara and Sahel, and that is working to address climate change. and mitigate its impacts and combat desertification, etc. So there are volunteers, national and international, with specialized skills who are working on that. We also have volunteers serving in the state of Palestine. In 2021, it was 65 volunteers. This year so far, it's 91 volunteers. And again, you'll find their stories on our website. And we have volunteers who are serving with UNICEF on children and their rights. They're working with UNESCO, they're working with UNDP. So there are lots of different projects. One of the interesting ones you might want to read up on was a reconstruction project in the state of Palestine, where we had women engineers involved in reconstruction work with the United Nations Development Program. So I think there's a lot we could talk about, but we can't go into this amount of detail about every single one of our interventions. But I think for those of you who are interested, just check it out, whether it's with the Solidarity Corps, whether it's with the United Nations Volunteer Program. I think the important thing is that if you feel the urge to volunteer, follow it. We will only gain.
Thanks.
Full support to that.
Thanks for adding this comment also.
I see a couple questions in the chat. One, I saw Barbara wrote a post about Ukraine. I would still advise caution. Ukraine is very sensitive and we are very, very, very careful. So voila. There was another question on how volunteers are selected. We do not select the volunteers. Volunteers are selected by the organization that run the projects. So what we do, we assess and potentially give the quality label to the organizations on one side. We train the volunteers on the other side, and then it's between them. So then the organizations select the volunteers they believe would be suited for deployment. And we play no part in this. Just maybe a small point on this. There was a previous program in the EU called EU Aid Volunteers. And in that program, the volunteers were first selected by the organization and then went on training, and then reselected and then deployed, which meant there was a huge time gap between the first selection by the organization and the time when they were able to go, because the trainings, especially the face-to-face parts, had to be planned, and that took several months every time. So between the moment when they first selected and the moment when they were trained and ready, some of them would drop out or would do something else and would not be available for deployment anymore, which is not the case in our new action, where the training takes place first. And so when the organization selects someone, that person is in principle ready to go, maybe not the same week, but is ready to go almost immediately.
Thanks. Very practical details and information on that. There's one last comment in the chat. And Amina, I'm not sure if you want to reply on that, connected to a very broad topic again, the landmines.
Oh, that's an interesting one. We have had volunteers working on landmines, but it's been a couple of years since I am aware, at least, that they have been deployed, because I have to say, in my defense, I'm a communications person, so it's only when the results are worth presenting that I have become aware of them. So I'm pretty sure that there's work happening on the ground, but I can't share any details of this right now. Happy for you to check our website and research. We have had success stories in the past, excuse me, from Cambodia and work that we've done there, but that has been a couple of years. So sorry, Sarah, I don't have any response on that one.
Thanks anyhow for answering. And once again, I think it's worth looking at the website, checking out the informations, the campaigns, the material on both programs and both possibilities, connecting the world and using volunteerism, the possibility of going abroad as volunteers and contributing to the important topics we have to face. Thanks, Pierre, and thanks, Amina.
I see one last question about the SDGs. how aware are the volunteers in both programs that they are contributing to the SDGs? So from our side, of course, the SDGs belong more to the UN. So I will let Amina complement, of course. But on our side, we try in the training, we try to sensitize our volunteers to the SDGs and how what they will do could contribute to them. So we hope that the messages in the training have an impact. Thank you.
So Amina, I think you have the word once again.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you, Elizabeth. As I've said before, I think that all of our work is geared towards supporting what in UN speak we call the humanitarian nexus, peace development and humanitarian work of the United Nations and indeed the UN member states and the international community. So the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 are high on our radars. At the moment, like in the past, the Millennium Development Goals were. It's a framework that guides the United Nations in supporting the aspirations of countries to resolve their issues, which they prioritize, and we work together with them. So I believe all of our volunteers are in one way or the other contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. Some goals are more can be more prominent than others in different countries. So in countries where you have a crisis or a post-crisis situation, it is normal to have more volunteers who are supporting the peacekeeping and peace-building aspect of United Nations operations, where in others it may be addressing climate change or addressing food security, etc. So the Sustainable Development Goals provide the framework for the work that we're currently doing in support of the wider international community.
Thanks, I think it's a very nice contributions to end the discussions. I see there's still questions in the chat. Looking at the time, I would still say thank you to both of you and try to round up this very interesting and very fruitful webinar. First of all, before we have a final word from Amina, for these webinar editions, I would invite you for a short sharing feedback of these last informations, discussions, topics we shared. My colleague Maria posted a link in the chat already that leads you to a Mentimeter for a very quick question on what do you take with you from today. And you're invited to share with us once again, looking at these very interesting inputs, very high amount of information connected to UNV volunteers, UNV programs, to the humanitarian aid strand of the European Commission, and the discussion connected to solidarity, to the opportunity of volunteers that we have been able to share these last hour. Bit more than an hour already. So the screen sharing started, and I see comments popping up. And the very first comment I saw was solidarity helps our world to become better. So a very good starting point to round up these discussions. So to understand the context of the programs, to understand the programs and the exchange possibilities themselves, to extend the knowledge about it. Again, the topic on reciprocity and the problems connected. So that one that highlighted on the white savior complex, so what we were discussing about reciprocity, and that it's not yet, or we hope to work on that. Very interesting information. Solidarity is the core of volunteering is there. And the volunteerism is a great means of contribution to peace, development, and humanitarian support. motivation to use the quality label, to go a bit deeper into the program, good and interesting conversations. Solidarity and reciprocity are key. Peaceful behavior, learning and knowledge. Also the need for more possibilities for people with disabilities who are older than 30 to have the possibility to participate.
Until 35, it's okay.
And with UNV until 80, it's okay.
Ah, voilà.
Voilà.
That's the...
Perfect. That's a perfect starting point already to answer to that. Very comprehensive exchange. So thanks for the contributions. There's a next slide in the Menti on the feedback of today. So 3 easy questions, and again the invitation is, or the wish for us is, to share your opinion on that. On the left side it's disagree, and on the right side it's agree, and the invitation again is how much, to what extent this webinar was useful for you to give new insights and perspective, extended the knowledge of the various programs, and is relevant for your work, as some of you do have a lot of experience in working in development programs, in solidarity connected programs, in NGOs. And this will help us to work on our webinars and to go on with our work next year too. Great. So while you're still giving a feedback for us, I would like to share one sentence on solidarity that I find very interesting, connected to what we've been discussing too on the opportunity to contribute. And it's from an Albanian journalist, Gjergi Berluka, and I will write it in the chat. Give me a second to do so. He said, it is one of the basic features of visionary thinking to make contributions to solidarity and integration. And I like it very much, and to connect it to the discussions we've had today, I think it rounds up quite a lot of topics. Thanks for the feedback, and thanks for the evaluation too. And I would give the word and pass the word to Romina to round up today's webinar for us.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. In fact, I have the honor to round up 3 webinars. And we had in the beginning of December a discussion, a very personal discussion with Oliver and with Gabriela about stories about being a volunteer, about how international volunteering is, how European volunteering is. And from that personal touch, from that personal connection, we moved on the 13th of December into a conversation about global volunteering and about the connection of solidarity and volunteering in the framework of service learning. And we had the honor to have with us Nieves Tapia, professor from Argentina. She's one of the, we call her in a way, the mother of solidarity and service learning in South America. She also explained how solidarity and service learning is connected in Argentina. And of course, in that light, we also offered information. Pierre was joining also that webinar, offering some information about how European Union can support solidarity outside of the borders. And we ended up today with, I would say, with a round discussion about how the two biggest institutions, I would say, UNV and the Commission, how they support volunteering and solidarity in the world, and what can we do, what resources we have in order to promote solidarity and offer our time to become volunteer. So that was our journey for celebrating solidarity in 2022. For us as a SALTO, as a resource center that has a main mission to support the European Solidarity Corps implementation in Europe and in the world, we can just promise that we will continue to offer the space to have these conversations, to have this exchange of knowledge. I'm very happy that some of you declared that you are taking from this experience motivation, inspiration, because what is very clearly from our side as well is that we need you on board. We are an institution that supports a frame for you to work, but in fact, as Amina was mentioning, also Pierre was mentioning, organizations and volunteers who are on the ground, who are in the front line, you are the image of our work. So I do hope that you will find the motivation and inspiration to continue your work. And please let us know if you need any other additional support from our side. This is also why we are here as a resource center. Once again, many thanks to the guests. Solidarity Month for us ends here, but it continues for all of us. I do hope that this conversation will happen further on, because both the Solidarity Corps and UNV, we share the same value. And I think that's the gift that we all have. Wish you all a nice ending of 2022, a very smooth, very beautiful beginning of 23, and I hope to see you soon in one way or another. Big thanks to Elizabeth and Maria, the two facilitators of this journey, and yeah, see you soon.
Thanks for celebrating with us, for being with us, for discussing, for sharing. Thanks, Amina Said, for all the information, and thanks, Pierre, Seailles, for contributing and letting us know more about the new program of the new strength. And I add to Romina, enjoy the last days of 2022, and I hope to see you in 2023, and I hope to continue this great work and the cooperation, working on solidarity. Enjoy your afternoon. See you.